Eagle News Forum, and I'm your host for today's show. And today we've got some very interesting guests. We've got Dr. Peter Odero. We've got Frederick Anderson. And of course, we've got Ira Folks who will be joining us shortly. Okay. So, how are you doing today, gentlemen?
Doing fine, Dr. Beach. How are you doing today?
Doing fine. Okay, doing just great. Let me just start off with Dr. Odero. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what kind of media operation do you have?
Thank you, Dr. Malcolm Beach, for inviting me onto your platform. I appreciate you all. I'm just outside Nairobi, Kenya, the capital of Kenya. I've been involved in media and communications in radio really for quite a while. I had my first radio show in 1995. It was called the Coca-Cola Radio Show. So my thrust now is I have another radio show. It's called Good Morning Africa. We broadcast out of San Diego in California, and we reach possibly about I think 15,000 plus people who are signed onto our app, our platform, and I broadcast once a week. But then I'm involved in several other activities in music production, as well as presenting and producing things for various other media outlets around the globe. So that's generally what I do. A lot of people know me as a songwriter, a singer and songwriter as well. So I wear many hats. I wear many hats, which I guess is a segue for what our discussion today might evolve into. How do we survive in the quick evolving world that is present day media?
Yeah, well, I guess that's why they call it the creative industry. We definitely have to be creative. And Frederick Anderson, tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you want to add to the conversation.
Well, Dr. Beach, again, thank you for having me back on your show. I definitely appreciate it. For those who might not know, I'm the president of a consulting firm that advises and consults with businesses who are around the world who are looking to do business internationally. And one of the reasons that I was looking to kind of have this conversation, be a part of this conversation, because when you start talking about the African diaspora and doing business internationally, I think one of the tipping points is basically understanding communications, media. And that's where I was happy to kind of be a part of this conversation, and that you wanted to kind of engage in this area, because I think it's very vital for us to start having these meaningful discussions on how media impacts business opportunities and what are the business opportunities in the media space. So I'm looking forward to furthering the conversation.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, the media is very, very important because it deals with image, and the image almost controls what we think about each other. When we look at somebody and kind of see, are they different, are they the same, or how close are we together? And when you talk about the diaspora in Africa, that's a big gap that many of us face, especially those of us that have never been to Africa. You have all kinds of images in mind as to what Africa is really like and what Africans and daily life in Africa is really like. And of course, many of us believe, those of us that have traveled to Africa, you realize that it's a total different conversation with some members of the diaspora, and in terms of what they think is going on in Africa and what really is going on. So when we talk about the media, what kind of challenges have you seen, Peter, in terms of this image thing? What is it is it any different between Nairobi and California? I can't hear you. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
No. As you know, because you've traveled, I see you wearing a Kenyan cap with your Kenyan colors and everything is going on right there.
This is in your honor, man. I want to let you know I'm in tune.
That's fantastic. So Kenya is very much like in the sub-Saharan. It's one of the big four, the big four African nations. You have South Africa, you have Nigeria, you have Egypt, and you have Kenya as the four pillars of industry and commerce on the continent. Kenya is roughly 50 million people, which is maybe a quarter of the population of Nigeria. And so you have some interesting opposites or things going on there. And of course, sub-Saharan Africa, doing business in sub-Saharan Africa, which is like Nigeria and Kenya, is very different from doing business in South Africa and Egypt. So you have extremely developed economies in some places, and some places no. So the capital city of Kenya, Nairobi, where I grew up and have been before I started my many travels to the US. I've been coming back and forth to the US for over 20 years now, for various intents and purposes. In fact, I just got back from the US in the end of July. And it's what I've seen in terms of the differences is sometimes stark. Nairobi is a very, in fact, for all the intents and purposes, is a very westernized city. You can find many major brands, many major stores, except Starbucks in Nairobi. You still won't find a Starbucks in Nairobi. You will find a KFC, but you won't find a Starbucks. But there are various versions of these major brands, very highly developed, very intense. In fact, I would say it's a mix of somewhere between Atlanta and New York. The vibe is almost New Yorkish, but when you really get to meet the people, they have a very Southern American sort of warmness to them. But if you get to the city, some of these guys are super intense with their business. And again, one more factoid that anybody dealing with Africa has to understand is that 73% of Africa's population is under 35 years of age. I'll say that again, 73% of Africa's population is under 35. The median age of Kenya, you have Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, who have a very low median age. Uganda is 17, Tanzania is 18, and Kenya is 19. The median age is 19. So you're more likely to meet a 19-year-old in Kenya than anybody else. But of course, they don't have the economic power. So this is just some of the factoids that I think bring interesting, let me say, interesting twists. So there's a large population of the 50 million people in Kenya are under 35. So you, in terms of a market, it's a growing market, and you can see what the curve, if you draw any economic curve in terms of growth, you see that the trajectory for the next 25 years is incredible. So Africa is really your growth. It really is your growth continent. It really is the opportunity that many people may be sleeping on. So doing business here has its challenges, because then even though you have a very advanced economy, you still have connectivity issues and things like that. Basic issues to deal with poverty and finding ways to get your product to reach the market. So that's what I'd have to say as a basic introduction. Anybody trying to do that moving into the Africa space.
Okay, well, that was quite interesting. Let me ask our new guest to join us, Mr. Ira Fawkes, from the show Lunch with the Missouri Black Chamber of Commerce. Ira, tell us a little bit about what you're doing with your programming. Sorry,
So, no,
Ira,
I think
you're gone.
I think I understood this question. Yes, I think in two
Oh,
ways. What is the currency in Kenya? So the Kenyan shilling. Kenyan shilling is the currency of exchange, but big business is often always done in US dollars because the US dollar, for the most part, is the international currency for trade. And so that's to basically answer your question.
And gentlemen,
okay.
may I also interject in some of the conversation, especially when
Sure.
Dr. Darrow was talking about the marketplace, and he mentioned the 50 million in Kenya, and he mentioned roughly 200 million in Nigeria. But the continent of Africa has over 1.2 billion people. So if you take the United States numbers and multiply it by 4 approximately, that's the size. And I just want to emphasize that. So when he talks about 73% of the African marketplace is under 35, that's on that $1.2 billion marketplace. And I think that's important because as we look to reach into that marketplace and looking at the demographics from a business standpoint, we need to know what are the demographics that we're trying to reach and understanding those impacts. So I just want to kind of share that information. So I thought it was important.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, and it's growing. I mean, in other words, those numbers set to double in another 20, 30 years. And those of us that are involved with the diaspora that want to do business, uh, in Africa, now's the time. Now's the time to get started and to work with that. And the other thing that you wanted to talk about, I think, Frederick, was the role of media in that transition, in that growth. How can the creative arts impact that relationship between the diaspora and Africa?
Well, basically, one of the first things to that point, the role of media is the messaging. Basically, you touched on it previously, is the imagery that we all kind of perceive of different areas in which we are thinking about. So when you think about the continent of Africa, people might still have the imagery of undeveloped countries. And as Dr. Darrow basically talked about, there are some westernized developed communities that are significant. And that's why in my travels, I recognize that imagery is very important. Another component is basically the messaging. Media has to basically be able to kind of let people know that there's business opportunities that are available, that Africa is open for business, that the African diaspora is open for business, and that the people in the continent and the different countries are looking to do business with each other. And that's where I think, again, media plays a role. Lastly, for maybe this conversation, the other component is that media is a major marketplace. When we talk about media, we're talking about various components of communication, and I'm sure Dr. Darrow might want to elaborate on that, or you gentlemen, as far as the communication side. But then also there is the business industries behind it. Everything from the production side, the promotion side, and basically evolving the educational component of it, because there's a true intentionality to kind of help to develop the media side. And as an example, when you think about music, Afro beats now are around the world. Rap is celebrating its 50 years, but Afro beats now, I think, is on the rise. And so, Dr. Darrow, I'll just tee that up for you to have a conversation on that area if you like.
Let me see if I can strike that into a good spot, get a hole in one while I'm at it. You're absolutely right, Frederick. Thank you for your input. The penetration of mobile telephony right now in countries like Kenya, you have things like 51%, I think it is, large. So you have a lot of that translating into smartphones. But then you have countries like Niger and Chad, which have a much lower, people who have 10%, 6% penetration. So there's still, the majority of Africans, I think it's about 6%, over 60% of Africans, basically the main communication that people find their information is via radio. So radio is still an extremely important medium to receive news and communication. So whereas imaging, the image concerning who we are as Africans is clear to us, who Africa is to the rest of the world is not controlled by Africans. So that is a thing that has to change. We have to begin to find ways to gain a growing way in which we can tell our own stories. We have businesses and people who have built incredible businesses, incredible machines, incredible things that they're doing here and now on the continent that the world doesn't know about, because Africa, they say, contributes less than 10% of the global GDP. Yet we are the supplier of way close to maybe 60, 70% of raw materials to the globe. I think it's important for us then to then say, what is our messaging? And you're finding people like young entrepreneurs like Suji Moto in Nigeria, Julian Kula, who I know personally here, Vuzi Tambikweyo from South Africa. These are people who are young Africans who have started moving and are already continental shakers and are doing business on a global scale. And so it is important to begin to tell these success stories, messages onto the rest of the world, so that the world can see that there's not just opportunities to do business, but that you can actually succeed. And I think this is very clear. Let me throw something into the mix right there. And where the US, for example, and Europe is giving little to Africa, where input is concerned with trade, the Chinese are pouring in over 100 times what the US is inputting right now. So I think this is an important messaging where how we are seen. So it's important for us to then be able to harness whatever vehicles of communication are to put a clear picture. Part of the reason that I'm out there, and very importantly when I travel to the US, is say this clearly, is it's important for us to understand who Africans are, why they're the way they are, and then also open up to the opportunities that that Africa offers. So definitely the inroads, one of the inroads is, as I've said, is radio. Radio is still big, but there's still opportunities for incredible penetration. If some countries have only mobile telephony of about 10%, you still have opportunities for growth. So there's people right now who are jumping into those countries who are not really Africans, but partnering with people who are in Africa to build the kind of networks that would make communication much easier.
Okay, so that means there's a future for communications in developing Africa economically as well as entertainment-wise. I mean, a lot of times people think of media only as entertainment, but you're saying there's an economic development role to be played also.
Correct.
With communications.
Absolutely.
And so Ira, did you have any comments that you wanted to make on that? Yeah, well, I think that moving forward, give us some future direction, Frederick. What's going to happen in the future foretell the future for us with communications?
Well, I mean, I can only say that I know based on the interest that is being focused on the creative economy and media being part of that, and just recognizing that the world is becoming a smaller place, that there are going to be more opportunities in the creative economy space, especially when it comes to media. Because if you just kind of look at the progression just for the past 10 years, you may be aware the blockbuster movie that Denzel Washington starred in back in 2012 called The Safe House. Basically, it was filmed in Cape Town, South Africa, and it showed a very robust community of businesses, stadiums, banking, airports, and what have you. So it gives you that image. And now fast forward to 2022, The Woman King also filmed in Africa, a significant portion of that. It's helping to boost the economy. So as a result of that, there are a lot of other industries that are saying, how can we participate and basically capture the entertainment market? And entertainment market basically is the backbone of a lot of other industries that need servicing. So I can only tell people who are in the creative space that it's a growing opportunity, and you should look to the diaspora and African marketplace and figure out how you can participate in it, from the service industry, from the insurance side to the actual production side, as far as providing actual products and goods. And so that's where I see it going as far as the future.
But how can we get a mix? I'm trying to get the diaspora in on the deal too. It's not just you want to develop Africa, but how do we develop the diaspora, and what role can the diaspora play in bringing this image to the diaspora outside of Africa? What role can the diaspora play?
I think sorry, allow me. Sorry, Fred.
No, Dr. Darrell, I was going to say that I think it's a question that's adequate for you.
Okay. So there's already a model for this that's actually working. The diaspora, that is the Africans who are based outside of Africa, outstrip the US and Europe put all together 5 times over in terms of what they send back in remittances. So it's maybe 4 or 5 times over what the US and Europe all put together do in terms of aid, in comparison to aid. And that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for opportunities to really expand. And I think for me, it comes in 3 ways: to create empowerment for people in the diaspora by creating the platforms that they can plug into. The second one also begins with E, is educating those who are both in the diaspora and here, to be able to see let's give them the information that says we can build these bridges. And maybe the third thing is encouraging people through inspiration by showing people these success stories. And maybe I'll say in 3 ways, so that I was in a conversation, we began these conversations with interesting people. I met with the president of the Stellar Awards in July. I was in Las Vegas for the Stellar Awards, and the president of Mr. Jackson, we started a conversation as how can they move their product and come, because they see Mr. Jackson is one of the people who are what I call early adopters, who can see the opportunity in Africa. And so one of the things that I feel is the direction that we can begin to go is setting up units that can create content for the creative economy. Because the music business doesn't run how it did 30, 40 years ago. Before you'd run to a store and buy these records, but now everybody's either consuming it online or some other way. So selling actual units may be difficult, but the content is still being created. We need to be the ones in the space where we can say we have studios, whether it's film studios, whether it's music studios. We need to be the ones saying, hey, why don't we put up units in those key cities like Lagos, like Johannesburg, like Nairobi? Why don't we put up and partner with the locals to build the kind of studios that would produce world-class content for that creative economy? So I feel partnerships like that would be wonderful. Secondly, diving into and partnering with people who are into radio and broadcasting, whether it's buying up radio stations or investing in already existing radio stations. I have friends in West Africa and Southern Africa and here who have built incredible networks with the radio stations that they have in Eastern Africa, in Southern Africa, and in West Africa, which are hubs. And those hubs have produced some very interesting radio stations that then are commercial units. So radio and broadcasting is still going to be big, plugging into things like that. And then finally, finding ways in which we can plug into the telephony in the spaces where it hasn't grown. There's so much opportunity still for people who come into the market with creative ideas, where we can bring our mobile phones now and say, I want to partner. You can get people who are in the diaspora who come together, band together and say, we want to become a player in this arena and begin to buy into those opportunities that have now presented themselves in some of these countries. Maybe with a little bit of caution as well. You had people in the 17 and 1800s moving to the West in the United States, coming to pioneer. In a way, that's exactly what's happening in Africa. And as you're pioneering, please understand in the same way that you had buccaneers, you had bandits, you had stagecoach robbers. These are realities that happen in emerging markets. Wherever the emerging markets, the risk is high, the returns are high. But I think the idea is to then say, who can I trust in these emerging economies? Who can we partner with to then say, hey, I think these are safe hands to work with. There's people who have incredible experience, have demonstrated some measure of success on the continent and credibility. So these are some of the things that we need to be looking for, so that we're not just waving this, hey, I'm going to Africa flag and then get burnt, but really begin to begin to partner with people in the creative economy, who've had some measure of credibility and success. And I suppose that's my input here, to say, having somebody on the continent to point to say, hey, I've worked with so-and-so in West Africa for the last 15, 20 years. I've worked with so-and-so in the South Africa for so-and-so. I've worked with so-and-so in the East African community for a while. These are the kind of relationships that we need to start with.
And if I may just add to that, and that's why, I always say that it's important to kind of build relationships. And that's why in the case of belonging to some of the organizations like the National Black Chamber of Commerce, National Business League, because we forge relationships, as Dr. Adera was talking about. We have trade missions to create those relationships, because this past December 14th, during the African Leadership Summit that the president had, we had a gathering, a reception that was talking about the creative economy, and we brought in some folks from Lagos, Nigeria, who were creating a creative academy, partnering with universities here in the U.S. and universities in Africa, Nigeria specifically, to build an academy to help educate basically individuals both here in the U.S. and also in Nigeria on how they can partner together in the creative economy. So I definitely agree with you, Dr. Adera, that partnering is important and understanding who you're getting involved with. And as you mentioned earlier, Dr. Beach, how can it grow? Well, creative academies being built in country here in the U.S. as well as in other parts of Africa can help to kind of spur the growth in this area.
Well, let me ask you this. This is a tough business question. In other words, all of this takes money, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And the money comes from business, and primarily comes from business. So we're talking about market demand for the products. Do you think is a stronger demand in diaspora, or is it a stronger demand in Africa? Or just how do we deal with this market demand? Because that's where we're going to have to find the money to pay for all these wonderful ideas.
And that's where, if you may interject, there are actual programs to help fund creative economy-based projects. And they realize that the markets that we're looking to kind of be in, that there's opportunity on the business side. For example, the cost of producing a movie in Africa, I read a statistic, is roughly 65% of what it costs to do it in the US. So that mindset is saying, okay, fine. So businesses understand, hey, you can save money to produce products in other countries. And then, as Dr. Darrell mentioned, the marketplace, the overall market that you're looking to reach is growing, and it's growing exponentially in the continent of Africa. And then as the growth is happening in Africa, the diasporans, those who are coming from Africa to the US to get educated, to basically run businesses and to invest in businesses, it's basically happening in both sides of the equation. So there's a growing market and there's a cost saving to operate that will help fuel the financing of business opportunities, especially for those people who are taking on what I call the conservative risk, meaning the fact they're doing the business already here, or they're doing business in Africa and they're looking to partner together. And that's the key element. So that's my contribution to that question.
Mm-hmm. Peter, you were about to say something about market demand?
Well,
Absolutely. Sorry.
you go ahead, please go ahead.
Absolutely. Here's what I'd like to say. The Kenyan market is 50 million individuals. All we need to do, the reality is there's people who've made millions of dollars just sitting here selling basic products to Africans who are here. The East African region is about 100 million people now. So you can imagine a market of 100 million. What needs to happen is finding products and services that can then be sold to this emerging economy. Because it's growing, we're really talking about fast-moving consumer goods. We're talking about other, what I'd call low-hanging fruit that people can invest in. But that's a saturated market already, because you have the Unilevers who are here, you have all these big global players who are already here, who are not playing in the creative economy side. They're not playing in that space. So it gives an opportunity for somebody with the vision to then say, let's not look at, because this is one of the problems, is that, Africa Free Trade Agreement is heading towards this, creating one huge market so that the trade tariffs and barriers across Africa can easily be overcome. Because I believe that the future for Africa is intra-African trade, not necessarily exporting, which is definitely big, but intra-Africa trade. And when you begin to look at that, the consumption, for example, of Afrobeats as the music or creative products that's coming out of especially Nigeria, Ghana and Nigeria. Kenya is one of the highest consumers of these products. But because it's not an actual product that's being sold, then the gateways to access those products, the creative products, is what is being controlled. And people are paying premium price for access to those gateways. So it takes a little bit of ingenuity and the ability to see, if I can buy into gateways, if I can buy into portals, if I can become the supplier of these products, then you change the narrative. And that always, the person who buys gold and the person who mines gold, who's going to be the wealthier person? It's definitely the person who owns the mine. So if I have access to the mine, which is the creative economy, then we're in the perfect place right now to then say, hey, we've created Afro-America. We call it Afro-America Communications. And we're jumping into Africa. We're building film studios. We're partnering to build film studios and to build recording studios to create the products for this creative economy. We're buying into the radio stations and telephone companies. Those are the gateways. You have a mine and a gateway. People start to pay you to begin to then move into that space. And I believe that the advertisers then begin to look at the numbers. When they see the numbers that we begin to then produce, the advertisers jump on it and they'll pay you what they're paying now in the millions of dollars to access what is already being produced. So I believe that it really just takes a little bit of visionary insight to be able to see this. I have a friend who I introduced Frederick to, who's called Jazzy Jordan, Dr. James Jordan, who's based in Atlanta, who set up something like that and has onboarded in the thousands of subscribers. That's growing daily. And this is something within the last year that was produced out of the information that I gave him. So I feel that there's an opportunity here to then say, let's take this a step forward. Let's build the platforms. Let's create the engines that then produce these musicians and artists and creative producers and directors, and then let's go there. Allow me to say lastly, Nigeria and Ghana focused on two things. Ghana and Nigeria focused on creating the space, and the Ghanaian government especially was very deliberate about creating the space for development of film. And so very high quality films began to come out, locally produced film for the local market. And the same happened with Nigeria. So Nigeria became a self-sustaining, introverted market that eventually created so much product that what we're getting now is the overflow of what was already produced in Nigeria. Nigerians are exporting the musicians. I don't know how many Nigerian musicians have moved to Kenya because their market is saturated. So it's overflowing. And so and they're super skilled. These are some of the most incredible musicians that I've ever heard. One of my music producers, and we just did a product that's going to be launched in London this month. One of the songs that we produced for one of our English partners. And my music director is actually a Nigerian who lives in Nairobi now. So my thing is, there's opportunities. All we need to do is really just say, okay, what is the entry level? What's the low-hanging fruit? Putting together a studio, a world-class studio in these various cities is not unachievable. It's something that the people within this circle can actually put finances together to do. Putting together a world-class film studio is not something impossible to do with the right kind of partners and the right kind of networks that we already have access to in this circle, the Black Chamber of Commerce, and so on. Those are the people who we can then say, hey, let's go to Africa. We're putting a studio in Cape Town. We're putting a studio in Nairobi. And this will translate down the line into creating the engine that produces these products, and secondly, the gateways, that we then become a gateway. Did I say Afro-American communications? whatever we end up calling it. I'm just saying that for the sake of this. So if you do end up setting something like that, you need to include me so that I can get my nice percentage.
Okay, well,
Absolutely. I mean, you're not only included, you'll probably be leading the effort, you know. But Ira, did you want to say something? You had a comment on this?
I want to say a couple of things. First of all, Doctor, I'm located here in St. Louis, which is the gateway, to the west, and the Archer in St. Louis. Naturally, we use the word gateway, but I kind of foresee with Wiggle Review that one of the things that you mentioned there is that you are the on-the-ground country for people coming into Africa, and that I'm most excited about the fact that you call what I call virgin territory. That if you want to do something, it's not that hard. Most times it's hard because you don't have the right tools in your toolbox to do something. And I agree that Frederick and putting together this show, we're going to do something next month here, meant to be a gateway to the world. And I have to say, Dr. General, we are having a conference here in St. Louis in next April in St. Louis and Ferguson, Missouri. I'd like to invite you to come here along with Dr. Beach and actually Frederick. And we have over 300 global corporations in St. Louis that's do business in around the world. And I think it'd be like another gateway, okay, like another system. A lot of other industries that want to do business in Africa and you want to do business in this country. So this is actually like the perfect match here. And that's why we're doing these programs now, that we kind of showcase what the National Chamber of Commerce has put together over the years. And as Frederick can tell you, he put together a one fantastic network of countries around the world, mentioning the whole diaspora, that the NASDAQ Chamber of Commerce, we're in a position now to be an integral part of what you described.
Yeah, well, those are some excellent points on that. Now we've covered the market and the demand, but what are some of the obstacles? I mean, we always got some obstacles that are blocking us from achieving some of our objectives, or slowing us down anyway. They're never going to stop us, okay? We're going to get there eventually. But what are some of the obstacles you think that we should look out for, plan for, as we go forward?
Well, one of the things that I think is always can be a challenge is making sure that you have the rights to your intellectual property. When you start talking into the media space, there are a lot of people that might not be savvy enough or understand what they need to do to protect their intellectual property. And that's where, when you do start doing international business, you want to make sure that you have your trademarks and your basically your patents in place to protect your intellectual property before you leave the country. And then when you go into other countries, find out what's the requirements to make sure, to the best of your ability, that you can protect your intellectual property. And then that kind of leads to being able to kind of then connect with the right partners, as we talked about before, and making sure you vet the other businesses or the relationships that you have, and recognizing that these are just some of what I call the preliminary issues that you want to make sure that you have in place. Because once you start talking to people in other countries, you want to make sure what's your asset, what's your property, is something that you can take claim to. So that's the first step, and there are several more that I don't think we have time to go into today, but we'll gladly, have some information to you, Dr. Beach, about the other headwinds. But some of you mentioned financing, right? And just making sure you address the right financing package, doing the market research, making sure you understand what your market needs, and understanding how to market to your market. So that's my approach, and I'll leave some time for Dr. Darrow to kind of give some thoughts.
Yeah, we talked about, you're absolutely right about the intellectual property, because if you notice recently, a lot of people have talked about the value of Prince and his music, Michael Jackson and his music. A lot of that, that's big wealth, big time money. And you're right, as you get into the industry, you need to know how to do that. So go ahead, Dr. Pete, you going to tell us something?
Absolutely. So here's the thing. There's two things I immediately want to say: that you're dealing with 1.2 billion people with hundreds of languages, hundreds of different languages. So that's one of the big things you have to find. The former British colonies mainly speak English. The former French colonies mainly speak French. The former Spanish colonies, there's about 3 in Africa, speak Spanish. But then you also have hundreds of dialects that you're dealing with. So that's one of the things. Being able to find the right spaces to navigate through that. Currencies. And I think Dr. Folks said something there. The trade between Nigeria and Kenya is done in US dollars because we don't have an African currency, an African common currency to trade in. There's been a huge talk about this. And of course, there's resistance to it because, if we stop trading in US dollars, guess what? No more American money needed in Africa. So the Francophone countries, part of the energy that's driving the coups in the 7 coups in the former French colonies, 7 countries that we've had in the last 3 years, has to do with throwing off the shackles of the French franc. These economies are backed by the French franc, and part of the clamor right now is to throw off the shackles of being subject to foreign economies. So currencies is very important. Let me say a couple of things. One is to do with standards. Because of such a diverse market, the market is so diverse, finding the standards for various spaces the standards that are, for example, in South Africa or in Kenya are very different from the standards in Chad or Niger, for example. So that's just one of the things we have to look out for, being able to set standards. And then maybe lastly, I'd say is turnaround times. Whereas a country like Kenya may have a faster turnaround time, other countries like Congo may have a much slower turnaround time because of less developed infrastructure. Congo, I think, is in terms of GNP, is internationally one of the top 5 countries in GNP. But GDP, it's all the way at the back because of just lack of infrastructure. So I think it's important for us to then say, if we're going to come into Africa, these are some of the realities that we have to face. I can't overemphasize the metaphor that I like to give of what was that show? It was called Little House on the Prairie, where you had Charlie Ingalls bushwalking across the prairies and building his own log house. This is really where we are with many of the African spaces. It may not look like it, but that's really the thing. And so the challenges that were there at that time are different from but their challenges all the same. So you're coming into frontier country. This is something we have to keep at the top of our mind. Africa is a frontier, and a frontier has its challenges built into it. And part of the beauty is being able to walk away and say, I helped create a path. This road wasn't here before I came. Allow me to say a little bit about my past. There was a time I made an incredible contribution to creating what we call now in Kenya the contemporary gospel music scene. If you ask anybody who knows anything about Kenya, ask them about my name, they will tell you that they actually began to call me the godfather of contemporary gospel music in Kenya. So before there was anything, I helped create an actual market, $1 million market that is actually now existent. And anybody in the market will tell you that those are my credentials. I'm proud to say. What I want to say is that this is there's multiple ways. This can my experience in this has helped me really understand Africa in a way that I feel is important for us. To understand Zimbabwe, to understand Uganda, to understand those markets and the places that I've actually been to then see what the connection is between the creative economy and actual markets where you have products being sold. Because the products need the creative economy. Nobody switches on the radio to listen to ads. They switch on the radio to listen to music.
Right.
And when you create the music, then the musicians need to get paid for the music that the advertisers interrupt. So this is and everybody knows that if you've been in that media space, that is something that's very well known. Again, thank you for your time. I know I've hogged a little bit.
No, you're giving us great information. Absolutely. Let me try to ask another question, since we're talking about obstacles. Not that they have to be obstacles. What about the government? Does the government have a role in developing this industry?
Well, I mean, definitely, in I would say every industry, the government plays a role, and as far as they can provide incentives to get the markets developed, that's what I think they try to play, and that we should anticipate them to play. And sometimes when you're developing in new market spaces, they might not know what are the best practices to be deployed, and that's where I think it's incumbent upon when we do that exchange of information that we might be able to share with them, especially when we're talking about media, what are some of the incentives that they can offer to the media space, as far as providing reduced tariffs, providing more expediency to kind of dealing with the intellectual property rights, and just kind of giving some guidance on some of the standards that are needed from one market for another company to come into the marketplace. So there's got to be a role for them, and they're actually trying to play that role. And but at the same time, it's got to be a balance, because we don't want the government to kind of be the director of the commerce that needs to get done. we want business to direct that commerce. So that's my input to that very, very specifically.
Yeah. Okay.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I would agree. The government creates the enabling environment and provides the licensing so that we can protect the interests of whoever's investing. So I think that's my input. And like to Frederick's point, certainly there's the government is interested in seeing commerce happen. Governments are interested in seeing that happen all over Africa. But sometimes they're just clueless as to what's happening.
Yeah.
Very few people right now have a robust digital regime for dealing with intellectual property where the digital space is concerned, because this is an emerging it's an emerging economy. Even though we're making millions, how do you police it? How do you manage it? How do you deal with the exponential growth? What laws are there for the players that are involved? A recent statistic I got was that Kenya was number one in terms of TikTok penetration in Africa, but there's to the point where the members of parliament were beginning to debate the whole question of TikTok. Well, where do you even begin? Because many of these members of parliament, when they were whatever they studied is obsolete with regard to what intellectual property or technological advancement is concerned. So all they know is that there's something called TikTok, but they are at a loss as to how to deal with this. And of course, we had a repeat of this an exact replica of this in the US. And so what do? When we don't understand something, we ban it. So I think it's important for us to have people who are clear in the understanding of where. That's why I call it visionary leaders. What I'm doing now is finding visionary leaders who can lead the charge in being able to say, I have somebody who is clear on where the technological advancement, where the digital space is concerned, is going. These are people who can now bring very clear structures and ideas to create the kind of space that will not just be profitable, but also beneficial to the consumers.
Yeah, I mean, in Kenya, I think they've even got a cabinet secretary on the cabinet level that's dealing with the creative industry. So it's coming
Absolutely.
along. Yeah, it's really coming along.
Some of the, yeah, it is.
So, Ira, did you have a comment on the government relations?
Well, yeah. Well, really, okay. That is always interesting to be the government. That's one of the things I know. When people from our country come into Kenya, that's one of the barriers I've heard about for years, that knowing who to talk to, in fact, who can help them and not be a hindrance to them. I mean, that's one of the things that I think about talking about this. Very impressed when we went to the Stella Award. One of the people that we work very close with, which is Bishop Rubin, okay, who is married to one of the pastors. Our bishop, I said, the Italian bishop, is one of the Clark family, and that who I'm talking about. But I think when I weigh with you in a whole lot of weight, we have changes that we can work through and work with. Move forward.
Yeah. Okay. Now, one last thing. We've only got a few minutes left, but something very interesting is happening in America. Two of our famous music stars, was it Taylor Swift and Beyonce, have converted their concerts into films.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the money just keeps on rolling, and that they're having sellout crowds in the live concerts, and now they're talking about having sellout crowds with film. So what does that mean for an artist in terms of what they can look forward to with their talents and their creativity?
I mean, I think
Well,
it opens up a true vision into what I call the overall entertainment business. And I'm gonna take an angle not just from the artist angle, but basically the conversation really, that question stimulates the conversation on the economic impact that they have on the areas in which they perform. You know, because basically when they go into a concert, think about the engineers that have to be hired from a sound perspective for setting up the stages. Think about the people that are going to come into their concert. So I think that's the first thing. And the reason I take that angle because they also do international concerts. And I read a report where a number of people, because the ticket prices in the U.S. was exorbitant and at Beyonce's concerts, and therefore they said, let me go to other countries to visit them. So I think strategically, we as a diasporan, from an entertainment standpoint, have to start saying, if I'm a major diasporan performer, let me bring my talent to the countries, because I'm not only going to help what I call the direct media entertainment industry, but the ripple effects are going to happen from hotels, restaurants, clothing. There's so many other impacts in addition to creating an added space for the artists to kind of merchandise their platform. So I think it's a positive, but we have to be more strategic in making it happen. Now that it's been exposed, that guess what? These entertainers create economic waves, and that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's almost like things are about to get balanced out. In other words, you don't have to be a billionaire investor to get into the billionaire business. You know, everybody in the community, if you got some talent, and if you can help that talent grow, you have an opportunity to be involved in this creative industry.
Well, Dr. Beach, let me say something here, okay? Being a former producer myself in the entertainment business, what Frederick mentioned there is very important, that the people in the background that actually put things together, and even the studios there, even the engineers there. And one of the things that we've been able to benefit from the Taylor Swift, bubble here with dating right now, but just to see how Kelsey and jerseys that have been 400 more jerseys that have been sold right away just because of he being around her. So, I mean, it's like something. It's like a high tide has raised all boats. I mean, in the industry right now, it's visionary, and it's also a blessing to be in that area. Okay, when we find ourselves right now in the media, being able to be a part of that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I want to really thank you, gentlemen. Today was one of the most exciting, interesting conversations that we've had on Eagle News Forum. We're on the Clevenard platform on YouTube. And if you wanted to contact us, I'm at beacheagle@gmail.com. My website, of course, is eaglenews.com. And how can we get in touch with you, Ira?
Well, one of the things that we can, our program today, okay, is being seen on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, live right now. Since we're doing this through Skype, using technology, and also we can be found on Spotify. This program today, by the way, gentlemen, will be rebroadcast all those mediums Sunday tomorrow at 1 to 3 Eastern Standard Time, and also on Wednesday from 1 to 3 p.m. also. So those are some of the ways that we can be found in Ferguson, USA, HotTalk.com. And also, I want to thank the manager I got on working with Dr. Beach today and Frederick Anderson for making this a reality today. Truly, this is a blessing for you. The technology at its best right now. Well, then, Dr. Beach, I have to thank you so much, okay, being such a great host for us today. We thank you so much, sir.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us. We all had a great time today, and we'll see you next time with Eagle News Forum. So long.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.